Okay, so I want to start this video by continuing a discussion piece from Keyblade Master's recent video on Cherry Blossom, where he went out and ranted, jokingly I might add, about people who lewd Yor from Spy X Family, because Yor is a married woman. As the only person in the world capable of matching up to Key's natural ability to scare the hoes away, I'd like to raise a counter-argument. She's hot. Like, I'm sorry, but she's hot. There's nothing I can do about that. She's just really hot. Okay, this actually sounds a little victim blamey. I'm gonna move on. So this video, huh? Pretty bad, ain't it? I actually don't know, but I'm gonna pretend I do know, so, you know. So, a while ago, Cherry Blossom blossomed onto the SC scene, and she started with a video on some guy named Ethan Brussard in his review of a SpongeBob episode known as One Chorus Meal. Cherry Blossom's video was covered by Shangri-La Slayer, and now that video is being covered by BlazeTheMovieFan, and that video was now being covered by me. It's been 5 long years of asking me to nicely cover him, but hey, BlazeTheMovieFan finally gave me a video of his worth covering that hopefully 15 other people haven't already covered. Who knows if I can get this out before the end of the month. I've really been strapped for time, no thanks to fucking work. Anyways, let's get this going.
Blossom, I'm ashamed of you. Not because of your video, but the fact that you have the objectively worst Powerpuff Girls character in your username. Now that shit is inexcusable.
I get that this was probably meant to be a joke, but I personally don't find it funny. I don't find anything funny about stating your opinions as a fact. It just comes across as fucking toxic to me.
By the way, if that cut felt abrupt, that wasn't me. That was how Blaze's point actually cuts out in his original video. Fun stuff going on in this chain, that's for sure. But for real though, let's talk about this point from Blaze, because yeah, like, look, I understand if at the end of the day all of this is just your opinion, but it's just kinda weird that you feel Slayer jokingly pushing the notion that Blossom is worse, Powerpuff Girl is toxic, even though you're aware or at least savvy to the idea that Slayer doesn't really mean it, at least in any serious capacity. Like, the joke here is that Slayer is pretending to care way too much about a subject like this. That's a type of joke that exists and shouldn't be inherently toxic if done right. Admittedly, yes, something like this can come across as toxic if handled wrong, but Slayer handles it fine enough by not pushing the joke in any ways where it could come across as him actually meaning his words or demeaning Cherry Blossom for not agreeing with his totally true take. Now, I will harp on Slayer because I do feel if there was any way this joke felt a little flawed, it was in its delivery, which feels pretty monotone and not at all up to the task of selling this joke. There isn't the sense of fake anger or self-awareness to sell this joke as well as it could have been, and I get the impression I only know this is a joke because I know sure well Slayer would never actually say something like this.
Some of you have already mentioned in the previous SpongeBob episode about the writers that wrote this one, the notorious Casey and Zeus. Yes, that's right. These two nitwits have written this one. Shocker, huh?
Oh geez, how mature. Nothing screams take me seriously more than insulting the writers of the show during your review. Anyone watching this video who wants to become a critic of any kind, don't do this. It makes the people behind the cartoon you are critiquing less inclined to listen to your critiques, and I wouldn't blame them because I don't know about you, but I don't think I take very kindly to being called a nitwit just because I wrote a bad cartoon episode.
First of all, nitwit? Is that seriously the insult we're complaining about here? I guess you can call this subjective if you really want, but this is a pretty lightweight insult and it really shouldn't be that big of a deal as you make it out to be.
Hold up, Blaze, let me cook real quick. I get that calling somebody a nitwit is small potatoes compared to, well, name your list of insults here, but at the end of the day, it's ultimately the intentions behind that insult that really matter here. And so Blossom has every right to get up in arms about Ethan insulting the writers because, look, Ethan could have called the writers fucking poopy faces for all I care, but if at the end of the day he seriously meant to say that in a way to demean these writers and make them feel lesser for writing a bad episode of a fucking cartoon, then it's fair to not like that and criticize that aspect of his review because let's face it, that comes off as immature and unneeded because ultimately these are just cartoon episodes. And these are people, ordinary people writing these cartoon episodes. Now, I will say there are elements that you could get a little more angry at these writers for handling, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here.
You're missing her point. It's not that insult in particular she has a problem with. She just has a problem with insulting writers in general.
I wouldn't say Slayer is missing the point, it more so comes across that he doesn't feel the insult Ethan levied was really that big a deal, so, ratio, I don't know.
And second, the point of you saying that it makes the writers less inclined to listen to his critiques is rather shaky. Not only since you don't know these writers personally and therefore wouldn't know how they would respond to being called nitwits, but also because it presumes that Ethan's doing this review for the sake of constructive criticism in the first place. For all you know, Ethan could just be reviewing this episode just to review it and give his thoughts. I mean, unless he specifically stated the point of his video, which you failed to show us. So overall, Ethan doesn't really have to go in with the specific intent of constructively criticizing Casey and Zeus.
Who fucking cares if he's just making the review for fun? That doesn't negate the problem here. And for the record, Blossom is totally in the right to call him out on this. Attacking the people involved in whatever you're hating is very fucking unprofessional. There's a reason why the mysterious Mr. Enter showed regrets to doing that in the past. And I've never heard Doug Walker himself say it, mainly because when it comes to Cherry Blossom, I just pay attention to the nostalgia critic. But considering that Doug Walker doesn't do that anymore as his nostalgia critic character, I assume he has regrets doing that too. What's important above everything else when it comes to making videos is to make yourself look presentable. And attacking the people involved in whatever you're hating is the exact opposite of being presentable.
Okay, how about we slow down here, Blaze? I don't think you understand where Slayer's coming from with this point. Slayer isn't trying to say or imply insulting the writers is okay, he's particularly critiquing the implications from Blossom's wording here where she states that 1, insulting the writers makes them less inclined to listen to their criticism, something Slayer disagrees with because he feels that's something that depends on the person, though I disagree with him to an extent because even though this isn't always the case, overall I feel most people probably don't enjoy being genuinely demeaned no matter the circumstances. And 2, that Cherry Blossom implies that Ethan's video is made for constructive critique even though she never showcases this actually being the case. So yeah, while neither of these points on Slayer's end would negate Ethan insulting the writers, this point in itself implies that Slayer was trying to dismiss that by pointing out what he does here, and based on what he says, I don't get the impression he was, so try again.
Plankton has been trapped. SpongeBob gives away the location of the formula, but then all of that gets interrupted with the plot point that makes this episode fall deep off a cliff. When Pearl comes in, it turns out that Plankton has a phobia of whales. Now, from what I've read scientifically, that may or may not be accurate, but I don't remember seeing too much about it saying that whales eat plankton. So, if it turns out that it's wrong, then they really screwed it up. That Casey and Zeus would have really screwed this up if it turns out that they're wrong about the fact that whales actually don't eat plankton. Then that would have turned out that they were scientifically inaccurate, adding to the major list of screw-ups they've already done.
Ignoring the spite towards Casey and Zeus, which I will continue to harp on.
Please motherfucking don't.
Have we seriously gotten to the point of penalizing cartoons for scientific inaccuracies? How does something so minuscule affect the writing quality of the episode in any way? Oh, that's right, it doesn't. So pipe down.
How would this affect the writing in any way? I mean, it wouldn't make any fucking sense. If they're wrong about what a certain animal eats, then that would just create confusion as to why Plankton is scared of Pearl in the first place. It's a bigger problem than you realize, and you trying to arbitrarily label as nitpick is rather dismissive if anything. Though there is actually a way you could have actually made a point to Ethan here. Hey, Ethan, you say that whales don't actually eat plankton, when after just one Google search, I found that baleen whales actually do eat plankton. Now sure, this wouldn't exactly apply in Pearl's case that she's a sperm whale, and sperm whales don't have baleen, instead have teeth, but you saying that whales as a whole don't eat plankton is wrong. Not to mention how you just don't give a definitive answer as to how the writers are even wrong, as you just say, well, maybe they're wrong about it, which shows that you didn't do as much research as you thought you did. Now, I did much more research, like literally, I had to spend 3 minutes doing that shit. That's dedication, ho.
I didn't do any research on my own, since that's not important to my next point.
Okay, look, I never want to be that guy when it comes to getting onto somebody for having a very thick accent, to a point where I'm always vigilant when it comes to trying to understand people when this is the case, but particularly in this section, I really feel Blaze needed to work on enunciation, because I had to go through this section several times to make out what he was saying. It's not always this bad, but there are several sections in this video where I straight up got lost and didn't know what Blaze was trying to say. I fully understand that this is something that is hard to control, and so I'm not going to be angry about it. But I do feel Blaze needs to be more aware of how hard it might feel for audiences to understand him. Anyways, from what I eventually gathered from Blaze here, he was trying to say he himself didn't do research for this point because it's not going to be relevant to what he has to say next. But in this case, whether or not Blaze did any research is entirely irrelevant. Especially because, again, he isn't really going to talk about whether or not what Slayer said is true, so I'm confused as to what this statement is supposed to add. I know this series, Video Thoughts, is meant to just be you giving your thoughts, but brief elements like this that ultimately feel kind of superfluous just, well, it kind of confuses me. I'm not gonna die hearing you say something like this, but it just bothers me at the end of the day, so,
Right now, I am going to have a hot and juicy hamburger with mustard, pickle, and your best friend.
Actually, I would argue that calling out on plagiarism was faulty even back then. I mean, Mr. A's commentary on Johnny Roo, which he made back in 2018, was a very hated video in the slideshow commentary community, especially because Mr. A was fucking desperate to make Johnny Roo look like a plagiarist. And honestly, all the hate he got for that video was rightfully fucking earned, because it really was pathetic.
I'm gonna be honest, I think you're looking too deep into this one, my guy. In January 2018, commentator Mr. A made a video on other commentator Joni Rue in her list of the worst commentaries of 2017, in which Mr. A consistently called Joni out for plagiarism that wasn't actually there. So yeah, in 2018 this was something that was criticized, but Slayer isn't trying to say that was acceptable back then, just that we've moved on from this behavior since.
Also, I would go as far as to say that calling out on plagiarism has been a faulty critique long before that. It always bothered me when people said that Family Guy is a rip-off of The Simpsons, because those two shows have almost nothing in common. And I also realized this in later years, but calling The Arid Gamer a rip-off of The Angry Video Game Nerd was horseshit too, especially because the skits in the Arid Gamer episodes were very different from anything in the Angry Video Game Nerd show.
Well, I'm lost. So let's start with what I suppose are the intentions of Blaze's point. Blaze wants to argue, continuing with his misunderstanding of Slayer's point within the skip card, that even before 2018, calling out plagiarism had been a faulty critique. But Slayer's point isn't even that calling out plagiarism is faulty or has become something considered faulty now, but that randomly calling plagiarism without evidence is a problem, and since 2018 is something less prevalent in videos. So somehow Blaze has managed to misunderstand the singular wall of text two different ways in one interjection. But somehow this segment isn't even done being weird yet. So Blaze then goes into why he feels calling plagiarism has always been a faulty critique, pointing out two situations in particular that upset him, such as Family Guy being called a ripoff of Simpsons, or Irate Gamer being ridiculed and called a ripoff of the Angry Video Game Nerd. In the case of the latter, I'm aware there are many situations where Irate Gamer has specifically been called out for plagiarism, and from my research, at times these claims can be a bit dubious. However, this interjection seems to be talking about things being called a ripoff of other things, not plagiarism, which isn't entirely the same. Like, yeah, ripping something off and plagiarism can go hand in hand, but by itself, being a ripoff of something isn't entirely indicative of direct plagiarism. Kinda weird how that works, I know. But let me express it like this. Irate Gamer took the framework of the AVGN character and used that for his own video, so you could argue he did rip off the AVGN character. However, plagiarism based purely on its dictionary definition and applying it to this situation would imply directly lifting other aspects of the AVGN, such as his other characters, jokes, etc. So if we ignore whether or not Irate Gamer actually did plagiarize AVGN, we can at least suggest he ripped off the idea, but not so much plagiarized. Now, do I actually think Irate Gamer ripped off AVGN? I'm gonna be ambiguous with my attitude because I really don't care and I don't really feel like talking about it, so bleh.
Plankton is trying to end himself by getting run over by a bus. And then to make it even worse, he then says, oh, just go ahead and step on me. And then SpongeBob says, oh, but that'll fine to face my good nature. Good nature, SpongeBob, considering some of the last few episodes where you were a problem, which thankfully you're not the major issue here. Because like I said, in episodes where Mr. Krabs is more the bad guy, SpongeBob is surprisingly the straight man where he knows what's up. He knows Krabs is doing wrong. But yes, Plankton has given up all hope, where he wants to get run over by a bus or stepped on by SpongeBob to end his life. So that, Casey and Zeus, you two are nothing but bottom of the barrel scumbags for thinking that suicide is funny. It's not funny. Everybody knows it's a serious thing to deal with, especially if they had a relative, a friend, a loved one, end up doing something like this. It is horrible to go through. And to think that it would make for a good joke, that just shows that you two did not know what you were doing here. This is your biggest disaster of all.
I really don't like this level of hate and vitriol being thrown at someone whose worst crime is writing a bad episode of a cartoon. Ignoring how you completely misread the scene of the episode in question, do you realize you are addressing real people with real feelings? Because it genuinely feels like you don't understand that, given how vitriolic you are towards these writers.
That is literally not it. He's getting onto their case for not treating the topic of suicide with the seriousness that it needs. It's more than just simply making a bad episode, as you put it. And I mean, yes, you did point out earlier in the part that I skipped where you said that he misread the quote-unquote joke, but this is a point that specifically ignores that for the sake of pointing out his vitriol, so this wouldn't exactly be important in this case.
Are you sure you watched the same video? Because in the video I saw, he was clearly insulting the writers for making a bad episode. And also, it doesn't matter if the writers treat the serious subject poorly. That wouldn't excuse insulting the writers for simply making a piece of fiction that people don't like. Again, it's very fucking unprofessional.
Okay, look, I get that, but keep in mind that Ethan is, in this instance, insulting them for making what he sees as a tasteless joke about suicide, which goes without saying, but is a very serious subject. I feel like you're kind of misunderstanding the actual problem in this specific segment.
I also noticed that the whole "the writers are real people" thing sounds very much like an appeal to emotion fallacy, as they're trying to make Ethan feel guilt rather than actually making an argument to what he said.
I mean, sure, saying that insults are unacceptable doesn't exactly argue with a point. But there is more to commentaries than just arguing, you know that, right? People point out presentation issues, call out on hypocrisy, critique the emotions in the videos. Not all points made in commentaries are related to arguments. You have been making commentaries since 2017. I'm surprised that you don't know this.
This point feels like you're shoving the goalpost that Slayer already randomly moved with his own point. Can you guys stop moving that? I just installed it and it cost me my entire last paycheck to put it there. Anyways, firstly, Slayer's been a commentator since 2016, very late 2016 to be fair, but I'm gonna be petty and point that out. Secondly, you're missing the point of what Slayer's ultimately getting at here, which is that he feels instead of making any actual argument, Cherry is instead just trying to guilt Ethan for insulting the writers. Slayer isn't just saying this doesn't take away the point he's getting at, but that Cherry is appealing to emotion rather than making an actual point. So bringing up the laundry list of things SCC members tend to do in videos that aren't related to directly taking down somebody's argument is unnecessary because Slayer isn't trying to suggest Cherry and other commentators only can or should do that, but Cherry is, or at least comes across as appealing to emotions rather than actually arguing him, which I kind of disagree with Slayer's point, but I don't want to talk about that right now. I just want to go to bed.
And after this, Wasm has a point that, while I do feel that they kind of take what Ethan says a little bit too seriously, I can't exactly argue with them.
Let me guess. It's another one of those points where Blossom got on this guy's case for insulting the writers. Well, if that's supposed to be a joke, it isn't exactly funny. It just comes across as unprofessional, like I said.
No, that's not what happens. I don't know why you bothered to raise this point when you don't even know if that's the case or not. This segment exists just to reinforce a point you've made already with nothing added. I guess maybe that you feel that even if what Ethan is doing is a joke, it isn't funny and comes off as unprofessional, but at any rate, that could have been said literally any other time you've discussed Ethan trashing the writers. Anyways, after this, Blaze goes into a tirade about his own first commentary in response to Slayer mentioning how most commentators' first commentaries aren't usually that good before Blaze eventually transitions into his final thoughts, and so I'm left with nothing of interest to cover, so yippee, I'm done now. So, yeah, I've got nothing for final thoughts, so I'm just gonna go back to rereading Naruto, then I'll go to bed. So, yeah. Thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all have a great night. Cheers. Also, I'm gonna go back to looting your, good night.